NASA says that right now there is a marvelous and essential opportunity to focus on the planet Venus. This follows the new discoveries of possible life on the planet. If you happen to investigate NASA's records from the 1960s, you'd see the space agency calling Venus a planet of judgment. Meanwhile, Mars became our primary target. Such careful naming of the critical planets wasn't standard during the wild space race era. The Soviet Union was focused on sending missions to Venus. The shocking planet showed little potential for life, yet the Soviet space program didn't decommission the Venera program until the fall of the USSR. Thanks to Neil deGrasse Tyson, we finally understand why. Join us as we examine the declassified photos from Venus taken by the Soviet Union. The fall of the Soviet Union was monumental in more ways than one. Not only did it shift the global direction of the world, but the collapse of the USSR also revealed many secrets. The fact that the Soviets had a strong penchant for secrecy, running one of the most covert intelligence organizations in the world and keeping clandestine details about their true capabilities, suggests that extraterrestrial contact might have been among their hidden agendas. The former superpower holds many untold stories. Before the US surpassed most planetary missions in space, the Soviet Union led the race. While the USSR had a long history of both successful and failed space missions, its greatest focus was on the enigmatic planet Venus. In the Russian language, Venus is referred to as Venera, which was also the name of the mission that lasted from 1961 to 1983. During the same period, the US was busy sending missions to the Moon. In a way, the Soviets chose to allocate their resources elsewhere. We can't say that their entire fascination with the second planet from the Sun is odd. Did the Soviets plan to use the planet's surface as a potential power station? Or were they perhaps hoping to colonize the planet after searching for any signs of life beneath the surface? The question remains: why were the Soviets so focused on this inhospitable planet? As they conducted these missions during the Cold War, they weren't entirely transparent about their objectives. In fact, everything we know about the Venusian missions comes from declassified and unarchived information. Still, after such extensive efforts, pinpointing what the Soviets were actually searching for and whether they ever uncovered the secrets of Venus remained speculative. The Soviets didn't land on Venus just once or twice, but multiple times. In fact, they launched 28 expensive rockets toward the planet. Of these, 13 entered the Venusian atmosphere, while 8 successfully landed. Such complex missions placed the Soviets in a leading position in space exploration. Sure, the US was a close second, but NASA was more focused on satellites and innovative technologies than on searching for life on other planets. Their attention was on Mars, which wasn't particularly strange or exciting at the time. Your history books might not tell you this, but the Soviet space program was the first to send a probe into the atmosphere of a planet other than Earth. It also achieved several other firsts. The USSR became the first nation to achieve a soft landing on another planet, returning images and sounds from its surface. In fact, the Soviets had their own one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind moment long before the US. So why do we rarely hear about such achievements? Well, remember what we said about the Soviet tendency to maintain secrets. That's just one of many reasons for the oversight of the Soviet space program. In 1992, the renowned organization was decommissioned following the collapse of the USSR, and the program had to be revived under a new Russian entity, Roscosmos. Many of its original records were either lost or destroyed. This is precisely why we don't have a clear answer as to why the Soviets launched 28 rockets into Venus's atmosphere. Still, we can make reasonable assumptions. Perhaps the Soviet decision to explore Venus was more about cost-effectiveness than anything else. This is not to say that the space program didn't recognize the planet's genuine potential. They were searching for healthy levels of water, sunlight, radiation, and the general characteristics of the planet. Without these space missions, it would have been incredibly difficult to assess Venus's high temperatures and dense atmosphere. Today, many space experts don't believe the hostile planet can support life. The temperatures there are high enough to melt lead, and water is scarce. Additionally, due to its thick atmosphere, the atmospheric pressure on Venus is more than 90 times that of Earth. However, there are still ongoing advancements, and to disregard the USSR's contribution to the exploration of Venus would be to rewrite history. All things considered, Venus was worth exploring. Even though dominating the space race by looking at other, more habitable planets like Mars wasn't entirely impossible, it was, however, more expensive than sending probes to Venus. It all boils down to the distance between Earth and another celestial body. On average, Venus is only 40 million kilometers away from Earth, while Mars is, on average, 250 million kilometers away. Such vast differences in distance result in massive differences in cost. Had the US not been the world's largest economy, it might never have explored Mars so easily. Some reports suggest that Soviet missions were risky and had significant technical gaps. Of course, the rockets weren't capable of covering vast distances. Additionally, the agency had a poor history of losing contact with its rockets. So, it makes sense why the Soviet space program chose a more practical and closer mission that would yield results. Still, if we don't consider the space race in this context, the story of the Venera missions would be incomplete. The US wasn't even on the space map when the Soviet program launched the first artificial satellite, Sputnik 1, in 1957. This move kicked off the space race and maintained momentum. What's particularly interesting is why the US focused on the Moon instead of Venus. NASA had a series of failures with its Venus missions during the 1960s, which led to what was known as the Venus curse. Every time they launched a probe into Venus's atmosphere, it failed. This was precisely when the Soviet Union saw an opportunity to capitalize on NASA's failures. At that time, both the US and the USSR were determined to win the space race. The best strategy was to seize two distinct opportunities. It was a quiet yet decisive approach. The Soviet space program claimed Earth's sister planet as its first victory in the space race, achieving something its main rival had failed to do. Despite the Soviet Union's numerous contributions, their Venusian exploration efforts remain an underrated chapter of space history. Restricted assets and a wavering government repeatedly sent off missions to Venus to maintain their lead over the US. As opposed to NASA's emphasis on the Moon, this strategic decision was not without malevolence. In addition, brilliant propaganda was used to obscure their significant failures with Venus. The American government was provoked to examine the USSR's fixation on the planet, with the media naming Venus the malicious planet, while Mars became mankind's destiny. These names did not matter to the Soviets. Their primary goal was to showcase their supremacy over the Americans, and they succeeded. The Venera missions are almost forgotten in modern history. However, despite their early challenges, these missions were exceptionally complex, advanced, and aggressive at the beginning of the space age. The Venera missions began in the 1950s when the Soviets started testing designs and technical details of the probes. Over the next 30 years, they continued building and launching interplanetary rockets as part of the Venera program. Since the program coincided with the Cold War, the Soviets focused on optimizing their resources. Fortunately for them, the early years of the conflict provided them with more resources than the US, which proved to be incredibly critical. This advantage allowed them to construct larger rockets designed to withstand high altitudes and travel vast distances. The Soviets rushed to experiment with both crewed and unmanned rockets, while the Soviet academic community worked on a series of calculations to create precise routes for the Venus missions. Meanwhile, their Mars programs were also in development. Nothing was more important than creating advanced instrumentation for these missions, leading to significant breakthroughs in space exploration. In 1966, the Soviet Union launched Venera 3, making it the first artificial probe to enter Venus' atmosphere and successfully land on the planet's surface. This achievement heightened the competition between the two superpowers. Unlike the American missions, which were plagued by failures and setbacks, the Soviet program continued progressing. Despite their successes, the USSR managed to send effective probes into Venus' atmosphere. The main issue with this approach was the limited design capacity, but the Soviets quickly overcame these challenges. During the 1970s, they launched the most advanced probes of the Venera program. Their pioneering efforts included the first simultaneous launches of Venera 4 and Venera 5. According to most historians, This was the most remarkable decade in the history of space exploration. Certainly, the US tried to develop similar launch techniques. But why did the Soviet program choose simultaneous launches to Venus? To understand this, one needs to recognize that interplanetary travel requires advanced instrumentation to gather critical data. The probes were initially launched to study the planet's surface, and that is exactly what happened with Venera 4. Since the launch was flawless, the probe successfully entered Venus' atmosphere. The Soviet program continued with Venera 5, but this was not a mere repetition of the first launch. The second probe was specifically designed to collect detailed information about the planet. Eventually, the Soviets had to contend with the challenges of temperature, atmospheric pressure, and radiation on Venus. They did not have to wait long for answers. By the mid-1970s, the Soviet program entered the most advanced phase of the Venera missions. Everything the USSR had accomplished up to this point was about progress and improvement, ensuring their designs and methods were based on data while perfecting the techniques of interplanetary travel. During the second decade of the Venera missions, the Soviet Union completed exploratory missions. The most surprising and exciting launch of this period was Venera 7. As the 11th Soviet probe entered Venus' atmosphere, it became the first spacecraft to send back data from another planet's surface. By this point, the planet's high temperatures, density, and surface pressure had already been recorded. The Soviets were also attempting to record Venusian sounds. The next significant achievement for the program came during the 1980s when Venera 13 surpassed all previous interplanetary missions in complexity. This spacecraft was the first to capture panoramic images of Venus' surface. Simultaneously, the Soviet program launched Venera 14 to gather similar data about the planet's surface. As the Soviet Union was perhaps the only country to recognize Venus' importance, the Russian Space Agency has revived its goals for Venus missions. Venera-D is an upcoming joint mission between Roscosmos and NASA to explore Venus' atmosphere and surface. The name Venera refers to Venus in Russian. The mission is expected to launch in the late 2020s or early 2030s, with plans to study the planet's atmosphere, geological history, and potential signs of past or present habitability. The spacecraft will include an orbiter, a lander, and possibly a balloon to study Venus weather in detail. The legacy of the Venera missions extends far beyond their technical achievements and global significance. These missions, initiated by the Soviet Union at the height of the Cold War, represented a pinnacle of human ingenuity and determination in exploring the cosmos. Despite numerous challenges and setbacks, the Soviets persevered in their mission to uncover the secrets of Venus, a planet long believed to be hostile and uninhabitable. One of the most important aspects of the Venera missions was their pioneering use of robotic probes to study planetary conditions and surfaces. These missions paved the way for future exploration beyond Earth's orbit and laid the foundation for our understanding of planetary science. The data collected by the Venera spacecraft provided crucial insights into Venus' extreme climate, including its searing temperatures, crushing atmospheric pressure, and toxic carbon dioxide-dominated atmosphere. Moreover, the technological advancements achieved through the Venera program had broader implications for space exploration, including the development of heat-resistant materials, robust communication systems, and effective landing strategies. These accomplishments contributed to subsequent missions to other planets, such as Mars and beyond. The lessons learned from the Venera missions continue to inform spacecraft design and operational strategies in contemporary space exploration efforts. Beyond their scientific and technological significance, the Venera missions also had profound cultural and political repercussions. During the space race, these missions symbolized the competition between superpowers for dominance in space exploration. For the Soviet Union, success in the Venera missions was about scientific discovery and demonstrating technological prowess and ideological superiority over the US. The global community closely followed each Venera mission, recognizing their importance in advancing humanity's understanding of the solar system. The successful soft landing of Venera 7 on Venus in 1970 marked a significant milestone as the first spacecraft to transmit data from another planet's surface. This accomplishment highlighted the Soviet Union's ability to overcome the immense challenges posed by Venus' harsh environment. In addition to scientific instruments, The Venera spacecraft carried cameras that captured the first close-up images of Venus' surface. These photographs revealed a rocky landscape dominated by rough plains and volcanic features, providing researchers with valuable insights into the planet's history and evolution. The panoramic images taken by later missions, such as Venera 13 and 14, further enhanced our understanding of Venus' surface morphology and composition. Despite their triumphs, the Venera missions also faced their share of failures and difficulties. Several missions either failed to reach Venus or encountered technical breakdowns that prevented them from sending data back to Earth. The harsh conditions on Venus, temperatures exceeding 450 degrees Celsius (842 degrees Fahrenheit) and corrosive sulfuric acid clouds, posed immense engineering challenges for spacecraft design and operation. Nonetheless, the persistence and dedication of Soviet scientists and engineers involved in the Venera program paved the way for future missions to Venus and other celestial bodies. The legacy of the Venera missions lives on in the ongoing exploration of Venus by space agencies worldwide, including NASA's upcoming Venus mission in collaboration with Roscosmos. Looking ahead, the Venera D mission aims to build on the achievements of its predecessors by deploying advanced instruments to study Venus' atmosphere, surface geology, and potential signs of past or present habitability. This mission represents a collaborative effort to uncover the remaining secrets of Earth's closest planetary neighbor and expand our understanding of the conditions that could support life beyond our planet.